demons call when they do what they do. And now I feel like taking off, find a place with a view. The pain is never gonna stop if it's controlling you. I know that time can heal it all, I just gotta get through. I just gotta get through, I just gotta get through. Cause I feel like taking off, find a place with a view. The pain is never gonna stop if it's controlling you. I know that time can heal it all, I just gotta get through. Sometimes I feel like all is lost, but I know it's not true. I wanna put up all my walls cause I'm not in the mood, but then I cut myself off from the rest of the room. I know that time can heal it all if you're patient and soon it can all be worth it. Always searching, pain is never really permanent, but damn it hurts, man. I could feel all of the turbulence.
Hey, what's up everyone? Todd Castelline here, and we're gonna go over a question today. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. We go over all kinds of stuff, man. Whether it be fishing, do some boating stuff, do some podcast, do all kinds of stuff, right? I had a question the other day about a video I did. I put out a video the other day about the Series 5. I know I said I was gonna go over, or try to, like once a week, like something like a new product showcase, like talk about a lure, whether I've talked about it in the past, fished it in the past, whether I'm doing it now, whatever it is, like go over something different, right? Go over something different about a bait, about what I like about it, maybe why I don't like it, maybe why I don't throw it. This is kind of a little combination of both. I'm really not gonna talk too much about the bait. It's kind of gonna be a little bit why I don't throw that bait, or maybe I don't throw that bait in this situation. The question was this, I wanna make sure I get it right. There's a time and place for the square bill, and assuming more shallow brush situations, is that correct? And I kind of responded, yeah, what's crazy is I rarely run into those situations. Maybe I'll do a video on it. It's actually a great topic. And here's what I mean by that. So he was kind of talking about, you know, I was talking about the Series 5. He wanted to know a little bit more specifically about the square bill. Now, this is like a 2.5, Strike King 2.5 square bill. I don't throw square bills that much. It's crazy to think that, but I really don't, and I'm gonna explain why. First off, I did grow up on Livingston, where we threw a lot of crankbaits. The square bill really hadn't come out back when I was growing up, and so I threw a lot of just shallow running crankbaits that went like 4 to 5 foot, things like, I don't know, the Speed Trap, the Bandit, things like that. We're throwing smaller crankbaits around kind of rock and boat docks. Livingston did have a lot of laydowns and stuff on it, but I lived on the south end of the lake, and they didn't have a lot of laydowns on the south end. It was more, I wouldn't say commercialized, but I mean, we had more seawalls and bulkheads and houses and things like that. So I didn't have a lot. Up north was where a lot more of those, the laydowns and trees and brush and all that stuff was. So I threw it mainly around, like I said, rocks, some shallow cover, but we threw it a lot and flipped it a lot in boat docks. So I grew up I learned how to flip boat docks with worms and things like that, but I eventually started flipping them with crankbaits because I found it to be better. And I could cover more water with it. And this is important, more people flip boat docks and less people flipped them with crankbaits. Okay, so we're gonna get back into that. So the question was about kind of like laydowns. Now remember guys, I'm still a tournament angler. And so everything I view is, I kind of look at it through a tournament lens. When we go to these bodies of water, and whether it be on my own lake, or when I say my own lake, lakes that, you know, I fish back home, or especially when we go to new lakes, guys are fishing everywhere, right? We're always like looking at a whole bunch of different things. And so we practice a whole bunch of different things. So there's almost, when we go to like one of these tournaments where there's an open or a Toyota or something like that, it's almost impossible to go to water that hasn't been practiced before, or at least fished a little bit over the next couple days. What I found is most people, most fishermen, you know, in the past when I was fishing, like to do the same thing. And so a lot of guys used to like to crankbait like shallow wood. I never really wanted to go behind those people and do the same thing, even if it worked. And the reason, like, well, why wouldn't you want to go do it even if it worked? Well, it might have worked in practice, but come tournament time, if they've seen it a bunch, it tended not to be as productive. So I started learning that at a young age, that I always had to go maybe do something different for me to have success. So I was always looking at something different to throw. Now, I was lucky in the fact that I knew about a bait, right? I knew about a bait that kind of no one knew about for a long, long time. And now Strike King has it. Let me get it out. The Hybrid Hunter. I had this bait years and years and years ago. We're talking right now 13, 14, no, 15 to 16 years ago, I had this bait. It's kind of a square bill, right? Sort of, but not really. But I could replace the square bill with the Hybrid Hunter. So for all those years and all those tournaments we won and did all that, I was probably throwing the Hybrid Hunter and not a square bill, because I was like, well, at least it's different enough to where no one knows about it, and I can go behind everyone because no one has it. So it was great. So that's what I did. Now, it wasn't the only thing I did, right? Livingston was a dirty water lake, and so certain things worked better than others. So like spinner baits really worked on shallow cover. Spinner baits never got hung up. So I was more of the guy who would throw a spinner bait or flip, right? So whether it be just a crawl worm, something like that, like a rage crawl, or just a jig, I would go flip the jig, or a Texas rig, just straight up Texas rig. And I'd go, okay, I got something fast, and I got something I can flip and pick apart. Like I said, so now you have all these options, right? But those aren't the options. Those aren't even coming close to the options. I love to swim jig, right? So I eventually stopped throwing the spinnerbait as much because of pressure. And once I learned the swim jig, I started throwing the swim jig.
Nothing?
It's all right. There's bigger, but... So now I got that. Well, then as I started going more and more to clear water situations, I'm a guy who throws a topwater. Y'all know that. So I throw a topwater like crazy. Well, when I start throwing a topwater, I'm just going down the bank. Well, if I came up on a laydown, I just throw the topwater, and a lot of times I'd get bit on the topwater. So I didn't specifically go out there looking for laydowns. I've never been that guy. And I'll still get into that. But I just went fishing, and when I'd come across a laydown, a lot of times whatever I was throwing at the time is what I would throw in the laydown. And I started realizing I could throw a ton of different baits in laydowns. And so then I stopped worrying about kind of what bait it was to a degree, and I kind of just focused on the bait I was throwing on. So whether it be, now like, some type of chatterbait, a thunder cricket, if I'm throwing that, I'll throw that in the laydown. Every once in a while, I'll flip it just to make sure, but so many times, a lot of the baits I'm throwing catch the fish no matter what. So I stopped kind of worrying about, I have to throw a crankbait in a laydown for me to catch a fish. I stopped thinking that way. So when you ask me, is there a time and place? There probably is. In it's not like you can't go catch a fish on a crankbait. But for me, and this is just me, and all I can say is this: I didn't want to always throw what everyone else was throwing. It's kind of why I designed baits for Strike King, because I'm always trying to think outside the box. So I was always like, okay, if everyone's doing this, I'm gonna do something different. So I always viewed it that way. So I'm always trying different things. So now, we got the Hybrid Hunter, and we got the Hybrid Hunter Shallow. Well, this thing is almost like a topwater, but it's not. It's almost like a square bill, but it only goes that far underneath the water. And so I can throw that. I can usually make him come up and eat it almost like a spinnerbait, right? If you throw a spinnerbait over a laydown, but it's not a spinnerbait. So for me right now, a lot of times it's going to be this like the shallow Hybrid Hunter, right? Because I can get it underneath the surface. It's not a topwater. It's definitely not a chatterbait of some sort. It's definitely not a spinnerbait. It's definitely not a square bill, right? And so it's not a swim jig. It's something totally different that no one's probably throwing that much around shallow brush. So that's what I do. I tend to look at those things differently, and I'm always trying to do different things. Now, I think topwaters around laydowns are great. I think square bills, I think all these things are great. I just think sometimes we get too locked in or dialed in into this is what we have to throw. Now, a lot of times when you do start catching on it, on whatever it is, you do want to get dialed in. I just don't, it's hard for me to say this is the time and the place and explain when that time and place is. Most in years past, everyone would say, hey, it's a fall thing, right? A fall is when you want to throw crankbaits and stuff around laydowns and stuff, and maybe it's just because that's when people start fishing laydowns, is in the fall. Not sure. What I'll say is this: I don't fish laydowns. I rarely run that pattern because, like I said, when I go to these lakes, and if someone gets on that pattern, probably multiple people, because a laydown is very visual. You can see it. It's easy to see. It's easy to go fish, and they do hold fish. So if you're just out there fun fishing, by all means, that's something I would go look at. But for me, it started becoming one of those things where it was like I could see it, and if I could see it so easy, and it would stand out like a sore thumb, I'm like, man, it stood out for everyone like a sore thumb, right? And so I probably wouldn't go do it. Now, that being said, things are changing now, right? What used to stick out like a sore thumb as a laydown is now the underwater brush pile. Because an underwater brush pile is like, sticks out like a sore thumb. You're like, well, what do you mean? I don't see it. Well, with side imaging and live scope, yeah, I mean, they stick out like sore thumbs now. I mean, they're easy to find. Everyone finds them. It's almost impossible now to have a brush pile that is hidden. So I will say that looking at the way tournaments are going and the way I've started to see practice go, yeah, laydowns are starting to become, and I say laydowns or shallow brush, kind of starting to be a thing of the past. Now, whether or not you can win tournaments on it, that's different. Like I said, I'm looking at it through a tournament lens. But for just fishing, yeah, a lot of times those things get overlooked. But in my personal opinion, I would probably worry less sometimes about the bait and more about just making a great presentation with whatever bait. Because there's a lot of baits you can throw on those shallow brush and laydowns, especially the clearer the water. To me, the clearer the water, the more I'm going to throw things that are faster and maybe up on top and maybe aren't so kind of bold. And when I say bold, like square bills are kind of bold and rock through there and everything. If you can work it through there fast, I like it. Now in dirtier water situations, yes, I'm gonna throw more probably the square bill, the chatterbait, the spinnerbait. That in between water is more like the swim jig water, right? I still like it in dirty water, but it kind of depends on like how dirty it is, and if they're pretty aggressive, the spinnerbait's freaking unreal, right? So that's kind of my view on laydowns, brushy, shallow brush stuff like that. It kind of just depends. If it's really slow, obviously I'm gonna flip and go that route. A lot of times that's just because of a pressure thing. I think I was doing that at Lake Eufaula. You know, I was having a hard time catching them on moving baits on that shallow brush, but I could flip in there. And a lot of times I could even flip something really small in there, like a Ned rig, or even drop shots were better than just flipping a jig. Flipping a jig was kind of good in practice, and I could catch them a little bit in the tournament, but it seemed like over time they started getting a little bit, wanting something a little bit more subtle, right? They were not going to hit a crankbait, right? So those are the things that I kind of look for when fishing shallow brush. I kind of get the idea of like what's kind of going on, what bait I'm really having success on all over the lake, and kind of the pressure. Those are things I look for more than the actual maybe bait I'm throwing, or getting one bait and saying I better throw this bait on this brush or laydown. So I hope that helps. Don't always have to throw a square bill. Nothing wrong with a square bill, and you'll catch them on it. But there's other baits. Whole bunch of other baits. All right.